Hey bass friends, so today I want to cover a topic regarding vintage bass guitars. Of course on my channel you see various topics, and I plan to do abundance of topics regarding bass guitars, of course, all about the bass. So no further ado, I'm going to talk about vintage bass guitars. So what makes them so valuable? I know you probably have seen, or you may not have seen, the prices of these bass guitars from the 70s, particularly the Fender Jazz basses and the P basses. The prices has skyrocketed exponentially. They are crazy expensive right now on the market. So, I would knock out some of the cliche things of what make these basses valuable. So financially, what makes it valuable, of course, is the market. So, if some person is willing to pay $10,000 for a 1966 P bass, and that's what it's really selling for, well, all the other basses, all the other 66 P basses that are on the market will reflect that cost. As long as it's in the condition that it needs to be in and the original parts and all that, it will reflect the cost because that's just what it's selling for. So, these basses are extremely valuable. And the other thing is, of course, supply and demand. I mean, if there's only like 5 of these basses online and there's 7 billion of you people in the world, and maybe like 3 billion people want the bass, then there you go, supply and demand. So just naturally, that causes these basses to skyrocket. So besides the market, besides the supply and demand, is also the history behind these bass guitars. Like, of course, the greatest innovator, inventor, pioneer of the bass guitar, Leo Fender, designed this particular bass guitar. He was alive around that time, pre-CBS. This one was made in 1971. And of course, basses older than that are definitely pre-CBS, around Leo Fender time, who was basically running the shop with his team. So that has a lot of history entailed to it. And because of that, just that piece of history, historical component, these bass guitars will be very, very, very expensive. It's American history. So yeah, besides, these, cliche or I guess obvious things that make these bass guitars expensive, the other thing I want to talk about, to my point today on these bass guitars is, topics that are not discussed on why these basses are valuable. So these days, you may hear a lot of music lending to the 70s, lending to the 80s, during the time where the greatest bass lines were made, in the 80s with a lot of the funk groups, soul groups. In that time, a lot of the best bass lines were composed by the best players. And, it was the era where, the best players pretty much held the standard very high for bass playing. So they used, of course, Leo's jazz bass and also the infamous P bass. So because of that, because of the guy behind the instruments, these guys behind the instruments is definitely add value to these instruments, because you have the best players with this in the hand, with this in their hand, and then you have them recording on some of the top albums, classic albums that are still being played today. You could hear them, everywhere, in your car, in the grocery store. I hear funk everywhere. So it's here to stay. So that's the thing about this instrument. This instrument itself is here to stay. It's like a pair of jeans. It's timeless. It don't have an expiration date. It only gets better and better over time. Just like old wine, right? So yeah, so that's one of the things. It's because the people behind it who play these instruments, the history and all of that. The other thing is, like I was saying just a little bit earlier here, was you have a lot of modern music for those of you who listen to modern music on the radio, from the new artists that lend from the 70s. So you may hear some, you may hear a bass line very close to that, right? Maybe not the exact same thing, but something very close, something very meat and potatoes, like in your face. It's just like the main riff in the song, driving the song. I hear that a lot in like Doja Cat, who's one of the newer, younger artists out there in modern world. You hear that a lot in her music, and so many other artists' music out there that just kind of lend to the vintage style of music that is here to stay. It's not going anywhere, right? That retro vibe, but mixed with that modern music with the ambience, maybe less chords, but they focus more on the ambience of the song, and it's it's beautiful mesh, because you're keeping the old very essential old grooves, but you're meshing it with like modern technology like synthesizers and such. So yeah, so definitely I've been hearing a lot of these classic bass lines. So I could imagine the guys that are actually in the studio, the live musicians that are recording, are using these bass guitars. Even if it's not a vintage one per se, I'm pretty sure if they could get their hands on a vintage one, it'd be what would be better than getting the bass that represents and reflects the time that of the music that you want to create at the moment, right? So if I want to create something with the 70s vibe, what would be better than getting a bass guitar from that time? So of course, if they get their hands on that, this bass, it will sing, it will deliver, as long as you can play, of course. But yeah, so session musicians, I could imagine, engineers, they have their ears tuned to that J bass or P bass sonics. So they will crave that sound and want their bass player, live session bass player, to use those basses to get that 70s vibe or 80s vibe that they're looking for and they're trying to achieve for the artist. So that's definitely what is making these basses higher in demand. And of course, as the demand go up and the supply is down, the value is going to only go up. So the other thing I like to talk about is really the technical aspect of the instrument. Besides all the history and sessions and stuff, it's the technical aspect. The technical aspect that, to me, and this whole video is opinionated, right? It's based on my opinion, on why I think it's valuable. But obviously, some of the stuff is factual. But in my opinion, what makes this bass very, very valuable amongst anything else is the age of the wood. What makes a great bass guitar is old age wood. There's nothing else that makes a bass guitar great other than the old age wood. You could hear it from many luthiers. Many luthiers like to build an acoustic instrument first that has electronics to bring out and amplify the voice of the acoustic instrument first. I know some guys like luthiers like MTD, Michael Tobias, said that. I know some others probably have said that as well. Federa has said that. They build acoustic instruments first, and they have the electronics in a neutral position to bring out the voice of the acoustic, of the woods, basically. So the woods on these instruments are, this one is from 71, so it's all, it's pretty much all original. The woods on this instrument is over 40 years old. It's older than me, and I'm pretty sure it has outlived people, right? So it's priceless, because there's no other way to, there's no other way to get wood that old other than just to leave it there and let it naturally, dry, in good conditions. So, I mean, there's different processes to help, speed up the drying of the wood in the seasoning of the wood. But those are like, processes like roasted. I know they have like roasted ash, roasted alder, but the best way is for it to just naturally, dry. And one thing I could tell you is I've played, brand new Fender jazz basses and P basses at the store, and they sound amazing, but they cannot hold up to this vintage bass. The thing about the vintage bass is it has such an open voice. Since the woods are dried, the voice is very open, is very organic, and you're getting more of the sound of the woods than anything. So it becomes almost like a boutique instrument. You know what I mean? With, you know, I know these basses were mass produced, but since it's dried up so well, it just sounds to me just as good as any one of my boutique instruments. And you know, that's the beauty in allowing the wood to season and to allow the resonance, you know, of your playing, you know, after all the years of playing and the vibration get into the woods, the cells in the woods are you know, opening up, drying up, opening up, and it just has such a natural, you know, beautiful voice. And you know, that's the thing, wood is a living thing. It's just like skin, right? So it has to breathe, it has to, you know, go through the process, and it just has to be left alone. You know what I mean? So 40 something years, 50 plus years of just drying is priceless. You can't get that from anything else other than just letting it sit there and dry. So I think that's what makes this bass so valuable, is that, you know, you're getting an instrument that has been, you know, really seasoned just from sitting there over time. And you may ask, well, Jason, what would be the difference with, you know, maybe just, you know, having a block of wood sit for 40 years, and then after 40 years using that block of wood to build a new bass? Well, that's the thing. You're re-engaging moisture into the wood by, you know, obviously you got to glue the wood, you got to you know, drill holes in the wood. But to see the difference with this is this has, you know, this was built 40 plus years ago and has not been touched. I mean, it's just, everything has been kept into place, and you know, it's seasoned, it's set within its, you know, within its construction. So, and that's the advice I give anyone if you ever go for one of these bass guitars, definitely don't remove the parts. I know some people like to remove the parts to validate that it's actually from the time it's from, you know, and make sure it's original. But you know, if you could tell from a different way, please just don't remove the parts, because what happens is these parts, like for example, the neck is bolt on, but it almost feels like it's a neck through, because it's set so much in the wood. After all those years, it just kind of just expanded and molded in the wood that it just sounds like one piece. And then if you go to and screw these screws in the back, it's hard to get the neck off because it's just so like fermented into the neck. It's so immersed into the neck. So all of that goodness is what gives this bass its mojo. So that's why I feel like these basses are highly valuable, and will continue to go up in value, is because you just can't, you know, fast forward the clock, you know, within, you know, a year. You just have to let it do what it do, right? Let it do what it do, and it is what it is. You know, it takes 40 years, and that's what's gonna take to get it to sound open and responsive to your fingers. Beautiful sound, and very, and lots of sustain. Lots of sustain. You see the harmonics are still going. I have not even touched it, it is still going, right? So yeah, so you know, that's the thing here. I just want to take, you know, time to talk about it. I know it's something that's probably not talked about a lot right now, but you know, do some research and you'll see that, you know, these basses are going for, you know, crazy amounts of money. If you could afford one, I would highly suggest you own at least one, because you need one in your arsenal as a bassist, especially if you're a session bass player or you know, just a professional bass player. It's great to have one of these basses, so that way if you need this bass to, like, you know, record something from that time, you know, like that has a 70 vibe or 80 vibe, this instrument will accomplish it. You know, it's the best tool for the bill. And you know, I've recorded songs recently. I recorded a song that I just couldn't use any other bass but this one, because this bass allowed me to just stay in the pocket. You know, it's a 4-string instrument. There's no extra strings to make me go all over the place. I know it takes discipline, of course. I'm not saying that you couldn't play in the pocket with a 6 string or a 7 string, but because it takes discipline. But there's a different kind of feel when the neck is thinner, slimmer, and it just gives you. And then the sound, the sonics is inspiring in a different way. It inspires me to play differently than when I would play a modern instrument like a Federa or something. So like I said, I used this bass to record a session, and it was very simple as far as like what I went for. It was in the pocket. There was no contemplating. It was just easy. I was able to get the job done within no time because there was no like tweaking with the EQ and doing this and that. It's very simple, cut dry, to the point, and it sounded great afterwards. So like I said, vintage basses are here to stay. They're like a pair of jeans. You know what I mean? Like they never get old. They're timeless, and they'll just only go up in value. So definitely get your hands on one if you can. And if you like this video, definitely like it, share it, leave some comments. But I will see you in the next video. Take care, guys.